Welcome to Rust in Production, a podcast about companies who use Rust to shape the future of infrastructure. I'm Matthias Endler, and today we talk to Rebecca Rumbul, Lori Lorusso, and David Wood from the Rust Foundation about investing in the positive impact of Rust. Today we've got a very special episode because we talk to three guests from the Rust Foundation, and I would like to introduce themselves. Beck, Lori, David, say a few words about yourselves, please.
I'll jump in first. Hi, everyone. I'm Beck Rumbul. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Rust Foundation.
And I'm Lori Lorusso. I am the Director of Outreach for the Foundation. I've been with the Foundation since August, and it's been a wild ride, almost coming up to a year.
I'm David Wood. I've been a Rust maintainer for around 8 or 9 years now, and I'm also on the board of the Rust Foundation, so representing the Rust project's interests.
Now, before we get started, I wanted to ask a bit of a spicy question. If I am a production user of Rust, why should I care about the Rust Foundation? What does the Rust Foundation do for me, quote unquote?
I'd say if you care about Rust in any form, you should definitely care about the Rust Foundation and what we do. We are here to make sure that Rust continues to be useful and productive for everyone. And we do that through a variety of ways, which I'm sure we can talk about over the course of the episode. But I think if you are uninterested in the foundation, then you are basically throttling your ability, I think, to be as productive as you can be.
What are these ways that the Rust Foundation supports Rust as a community?
Well, obviously, we are responsible for all of the kind of basic infrastructure. So without a foundation, there's not a lot of support for everything that just provides the baseline. Even just really boring things like, hosting crates. These things don't happen by themselves. But of course, we want to make sure that Rust is also growing, that it's developing, that it has a bright future. So we're obviously investing in various different things like programs and individuals to make sure that, there's a huge resource for people.
I think too why you should care about the foundation, and I think David being on this podcast with us is directly to the point. Is that the foundation's board is not just made up of corporate members; it's also made up of project members that represent the project and how they work. So it is sort of your link to a connection to the project itself. Where, when you have things that you'd like to get done, bringing them, being more involved in the foundation gives you an extra link to the project.
David, how would you describe this link as someone who works in that area? Like, what is the day-to-day looking like for you as part of the Rust Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, all the sort of work that the Rust maintainers do is in some extent made possible because of the Foundation's support of the project. We can't do any of the improvements to the language we'd like to make without running lots of CI jobs and doing our releases and publishing those on all the CDNs that host all that those binaries on the releases, and all that's funded by the Foundation's work. So all the stuff that we do in the Foundation side, or on the project side rather, is enabled by the Foundation's support of the project. And what we also then try and do is make sure that everything the Foundation does to help and all the engineering efforts they have going on as well, that we work to make sure that's all goes smoothly within the project and those contributions are accepted, and that it's a collaborative relationship that works well and the benefits of all of us.
Now, as someone who has been part of the Rust community for quite a while, just like David as well, we didn't always have a foundation. In the past, the project organized itself, and I wondered, when did the Rust Foundation get started and for what reason?
So Rust used to live inside Mozilla. So, it was incubated inside Mozilla. And the thing about these kinds of languages is that for them to truly grow, for them to be truly kind of supercharged and widely supported by a plurality of organizations, you need a certain level of independence. Other companies are not going to would not have been giving money to Mozilla to help develop Rust. They obviously want a very vendor neutral space for that to happen. So, Rust needed its own foundation in order to kind of keep growing and to kind of inspire confidence in its neutrality for all of the businesses that want to use it. I think that most languages have a foundation, and I think that's a good thing. It enables people to kind of coalesce around the things that they really care about, and obviously the members that are investing in the foundation are very, very committed to making sure that Rust is a very successful and well-used open source language.
It might be an obvious question, but why is that neutrality important, the neutrality from vendors?
Well, I think it's important across open source, right? The principles of open source are that, pretty much anyone can turn up and anyone can use something. And it's the best possible space and arrangement to be able to collaborate and work together. This is another thing that the foundation is here for, is to create this space for collaboration, which businesses a lot of the time would not be able to achieve by themselves. When you're thinking about developing software or indeed any kind of product, it's very, very difficult sometimes for businesses to work together with all of the NDAs and the legal kind of stuff. Whereas actually this open source space is a huge enabler of innovation and productivity.
Is that also what you would tell a company that uses Rust heavily but hasn't engaged with the foundation about why they should?
Well, I think of any company that is wanting to put Rust in their stack, they should, be interested in the organization that is continuing to keep Rust moving. Like Beck said and David said, the foundation is running, is behind the scenes in the infrastructure. So the project can continue to innovate on the language, so we're sort of the building blocks in which they're building off of and continuing to improve the language. So if you want to be confident in the fact that the language you're going to adopt is going to stick around, you should be really interested in supporting the foundation that is making sure that that's happening. And I think that's one of the big values of having a foundation, is that we aren't going to let the lights turn off. Like, we are the checks and balances that are in place to make sure that if you run a job today, you'll be able to run that job tomorrow. And I think, it would be interesting to hear from David's standpoint from being with the project before the foundation, if there's been sort of a more stabilizing effect. But I think with the mass adoption, with Rust being around now for 11 years, having confidence in the foundation should give you more confidence in Rust.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, we as the maintainers can take us for granted that when we submit a pull request, there'll be CI run on it, or that if there's ever a problem with the trademark, that there's people that are competent and that care at the foundation who are going to sort those things out. And that lets us focus on just building the language and making the best possible language.
And is that where you draw the line between, let's say, the organizational things that would be handled by the Rust Foundation versus, say, things that affect purely the language? For example, I don't know, an AI policy or a contributing guideline, or things that are purely developer focused, developer related. Is that where you would draw the line between the foundation and Rust, the language?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the project is still sort of self-governing. We still have our compiler teams and library teams, and we decide how those work and how the membership policies are and what contributions we accept, and all those things are decided within the project. And, so what RFCs get accepted, whether we stabilize a feature, all that's decided by the contributors and the maintainers. What the foundation does is let us focus on doing that. And of course, the foundation are themselves contributors to the project, like all the big companies that support Rust and support the foundation. They're just kind of another contributor, and they support the sort of fundamentals, the stuff we build on, the foundations that enable us to do all that good work.
How is the Rust governance different to, say, the C++ governance?
Rust's governance is quite different from other kind of large programming language projects, particularly projects like C++ that are a lot older than we are. Projects like C++ have very standardized as part of international standard organizations. There are representatives from national bodies that are sent forward and they vote and all the features that go through and the people propose papers. That's very different from how we work. It's even quite different from how we're also quite different how languages like Python, which are relatively closer to us, work, where they've got a steering council that decide on every pip that gets proposed. Rust has lots of individual teams that are sort of responsible for individual parts of the toolchain that we ultimately deliver to our users. So I co-lead the compiler team. We're responsible for making sure that the compiler's well maintained, that we're fixing bugs, that we are able to cut a release every 6 weeks, and that we're developing new features in it. And then there's a separate team that focuses on the language evolution and making sure that sort of the language surface area is coherent and makes sense. And we do that for things like library, crates.io, cargo, all sorts of different things. And all those teams work together to deliver ultimately what is Rust overall. And they all just do it in the way that makes most sense for them and the people who work on those parts of the project.
Recently, I watched a documentary about C++, and the creator of C++, Bjorn Strustrup, he said one day a couple companies knocked on his door and said they needed some standardization, like a form of governing body or maybe an ISO standard of sorts. How do you see that being different to what Rust does? I think Rust is not an ISO standard yet, as far as I'm aware. Is that not relevant for the Rust governance, or is that just a misunderstanding and the story is different?
Well, I think that standardization is very important, and you can see Rust sort of moving in that way with the Safety Critical Rust Consortium, or I think I get confused. It's like SCRC, but that is a group that was formed a couple years ago of companies that need to have standards in which they operate because they're creating devices like medical devices, planes, automobiles, things in which they have a certain level that they have to be held accountable to because they're building devices that have significant impact on if they fail or not. So there is the Ferrocene system that's coming through, the FLS that the Rust is working on. The embedded group is very, very key to that. So I think when we look at governance, it's different than standards that are needed for organizations to move forward. I think that's kind of the differing body between C++, for instance, where everything is uniform.
You said FLS in the context of Ferrocene. What's that about?
Yeah. So Ferris Systems, one of the Foundation's members, they developed a specification for the language, sort of laying out the rules of how the language works. They generously donated that to the Rust project, and we now maintain it with their help. And that's the type of thing that's really interesting and valuable to some commercial users who really need that extra guarantee that here's what the language says it's going to do. They need that for certification, for qualification, for some of the sort of legal aspects of delivering the software they deliver. And so Ferris Systems developed that for their qualified compiler. They donated to the project, and that's sort of one of the standards for or the specifications of the language, which is like Lottie said, separate to that's the fact that we have a specification is separate from the fact that we aren't part of a standardized process for governing the language.
At the risk of being slightly too technical for one question, I had a follow-up, which is for the language specification. Is the compiler qualified, or is the standard library also qualified already?
I think the Rust project itself doesn't do any of the qualifications, so I think it depends on where you kind of procure your qualified compiler. I believe the different vendors, some of them qualify the standard library. I don't believe all of them do yet. I'm not certain. The key part, I think, is that oftentimes they'll deliver their own sort of distribution of the language alongside a spec, and they're sort of asserting as a legal entity that the compiler they're shipping, which is ultimately just a derivative of what we've produced in the open source, complies with the standard that the specification of the language they're also providing. That in turn complies with the requirements of the law that there are the sort of ISO 26262 for cars or whatever the legal requirements that they have to comply with are.
If you want to learn Rust on a deeper level and really get your hands dirty with challenging problems while having fun and seeing your progress at the same time, I recommend checking out Codecrafters. I personally use it often to sharpen my skills and would recommend it to anyone who wants to become a better software engineer with Rust, or any other language for that matter. The challenges range from building your own shell to implementing Redis and SQLite, all the way to Kafka and DNS. This is perfect hands-on experience for backend engineers and systems programmers. And if you go to corrode.dev/codecrafters, you can try Codecrafters for free today and get 40% off when you upgrade to a paid plan. Head over to corrode.dev/codecrafters or click on the link in the show notes to get started today. Which benefits do I get as a member of the Rust Foundation? There's a tiered system. Maybe you can also elaborate on that. And then how does communication work? Do you regularly meet in chats or even in person?
So we have 3 tiers of paid membership: silver, gold, and platinum. And your benefits will depend on which level you are a member at. Our platinum members, who are, that's the top level of membership, they are entitled to a seat on the board. So sitting on the board alongside David and our other project directors. In addition to that, there's a lot of, there's a whole package of benefits around, sponsoring RustConf. It's access to us as the foundation staff, and it's the access that you get to the project. There are, various kind of discounts on things like the training program. It's access to things like the Rust Commercial Network, being able to not only join those groups, but be able to actually take leadership positions. As lots of promotional opportunities, we basically want to make sure that we're telling really good stories about Rust. So we are always working with our members to try and promote the great stuff that they are doing in Rust. But I think one of the key benefits that's like a kind of fluid, it's kind of difficult to pin down, but it's being part of this huge network of incredibly talented, innovative, great people that are all kind of invested in making Rust as good as it can possibly be. So yeah, we have like a lot of communication. You've asked about communication. We try and facilitate communication between the members as much as possible. As I said earlier, it's really important for us to create space for people to be able to kind of collaborate and network and work together. So the Rust Commercial Network is a great example of that. But, we also try and facilitate things that people are interested in. We are basically here to serve our members. So if our members come to us and say, we're like, there's a few of us that are really interested in doing this kind of work over here, can you help? We are more than happy to try and facilitate that. That's why we have the Safety Critical Consortium, because a few members came to us and said, we need to do some work in this area. Can you help facilitate that? So I think that's one of like the biggest benefits. It's like, I can't sit here and promise you that you'll network with all the right people within the first 5 minutes of becoming a member, but being part of the foundation and being part of this journey presents a wealth of opportunities.
But those members, they don't have an influence on the language design, or this is also where you draw the line?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the foundation is here to provide governance and support. We do not dictate to the Rust project what happens in the language. All of those decisions, as David said earlier, are made by the members of the Rust project. We are just here. We're just the support team.
The project also benefits from the networking that Beck was mentioning that the companies get, and that we're always looking to learn more about how people are using Rust and what problems they're running into and how we can improve the language. And having things like the Rust Commercial Network or just our member companies, being able to reach out to them and say, what problems are you having? Tell us about how you're using Rust. That helps inform the decisions we make or our priorities as far as, as a language, how we'd like to evolve and change and grow and support all other users of Rust. So it definitely benefits the project to have this sort of commercial arm of the language and the foundation that has all this network, this large network of projects and organizations.
Yeah, I like that, because the reverse is also true, where this feedback sometimes gets anonymized and then published as a blog post, which kind of feeds back into the community. So at least from time to time, I see a blog post, and it's very helpful to get some curated quotes from people who use the language professionally to see where we are as a community. So thanks for that. And is there a regular meeting, as in a Teams meeting or a Zoom call or anything like this, where people have chats, or do they typically organize separate groups and then decide on their own meeting cadence?
So we're in regular contact with the members via, our regular newsletter. We have a Zulip channel where anyone can kind of drop in and have a chat. Specific programs have specific channels. So the Rust Commercial Network has its own kind of Zulip area where anyone can kind of show up and start collaborating. We have so we're having our first ever member summit in person at RustConf in September, which we're very much looking forward to. That's kind of, it's the first time we're running it, but again, this is an opportunity, a new opportunity to create that kind of space for collaboration I was talking about earlier. And yeah, we're really excited to see what the members want to get out of that. And yeah, we're hoping, we're reaching out to them to kind of collaborate on the agenda and what kind of work they want to get done there. So yeah, there are definite spaces. I think we're conscious that, people have a lot of calls all the time and there's a lot of events that people go to. So we don't want to clutter people's calendars too much, but we want to try and be there for when people want to show up, basically. So we're always open to ideas about if people want to meet, great. We're happy to support that.
We touched on the Rust Commercial Network before, but we haven't formally introduced it yet. Let's do that. And also, maybe we can also separate it from being Rust member or member of the Rust Foundation.
Sweet. So I'm very happy to say that the Rust Commercial Network is something that I've been working on since last fall. It was sort of an initiative that was driven out of the membership needs. They wanted a newer space to network with other commercial users of Rust, other people. Like, what kind of development frameworks are you using? What reference architecture are you using? What can you share? Like, how can we make this more open? How can we make this easier for people to adopt Rust into their stack? How can we say, hey, you should start with Rust from the beginning and all of that? So this again was born out of the foundation, and it's called the Rust Commercial Network. You can check out our GitHub repo. You can create an issue to join. You do not need to be a foundation member. What's really cool is that we have a steering committee, and the steering committee is comprised of members. There is one platinum member, one gold, two silver, one associate, and then there is someone from the Rust Foundation that sits on the board in an advisory position, and then also someone from the project, which actually happens to be David, which is awesome, which help just sort of look at what's coming up. You can create your own initiative, and then the steering committee's job is not to put any strict governance on what you want to do, but maybe just help you sort of corral other people into getting on board with what your initiative is to make sure that you can be fully supported. We do have a monthly meeting, which is, we just had our first one last week, which was awesome. And then we realized, as Beck said, nobody wants to be meeting to death. So we're just going to do one general meeting. And if you go to the Zulip channel, under the Commercial Network Zulip channel, you'll see a ton of different initiatives that companies and users of Rust have started to try and get more people involved with working on specific things that are important to them, whether it's async, Tokyo, GUI interface. Like, there's just a bunch of different conversations that were not able to be had beforehand in a way where we are in the Project Zulip channel. So you actually have commercial industry and those developing the language working together to make things happen. Again, we're not telling the project what to do, but we're just sort of showing the project what people are looking to do, what kind of initiatives, and then where can there be help, whether it's funding help, development help, like how can we actually bring the users closer to the project so that everyone can get what they want done and understand, like you were saying, the feedback loop. Like, well, we would like this feature done, but we realize now, talking to the project, there are tons of other things that need to happen first, and so can people from this commercial network work on development help, or is it a funding issue, or what can we do to try and unblock some of those things so that eventually we can get where we need to be? It's like I said, we started working on it last fall. We just had our first meeting, and the participation has been awesome. And the feedback from the community has just been really like very welcoming and excited. And I don't know, David, if you want to talk about it from sort of the steering committee project side and what you hope to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think you covered a lot of it, but it's a great opportunity for us in the project to like talk directly with people using the language and learn what the paper cuts are, and also help them understand what goes into building these features and where they can help, either with development resources or with funding. And that same applies not just project, but for the ecosystem creates as well. A lot of these companies might get together, realize, oh, we all depend on this library and it isn't that well supported. Maybe we can help there. And so hopefully it becomes a kind of a rising tide that lifts all boats, and it benefits the project, the ecosystem, and the companies as well.
Some of the more seasoned listeners might wonder about the following. On one side, we have these initiatives, for example, Async Rust or Tokyo specifically. But then we also used to have, or we still have, working groups. Where do we draw the line here? For example, I don't know, C++ interop story. Would that be an initiative or would that be a working group?
I think it just like it can happen organically. Like we do have what's called the C++ Interop Initiative. We were given funding to create this. We have contracted a maintainer, Tior. He's doing amazing. He's actually also a part of GSOC. So now we have more contributors working on this interop issue in addition to like what Google's doing and other companies are doing. It's just another entryway, if you will, into the project. Will there be overlap? Of course. Like there's the embedded working group that's been around for, I don't know, I don't want to say forever, but it's been around a really long time. And now we have a commercial network where other people can talk to the embedded. You know, it might be the same people, it might be the same companies are involved. But I think it's just like another entryway into the project, and you can determine your path forward, whether it's, you know, I'm doing this on my own time, you know, so maybe just a working group within the project sounds better to me because, you know, I'm not beholden to what my company wants to do, or your company has an initiative that they want you to bring forward. So you come in through the commercial network that way. I think the main thing is we want to give you more access to Rust, and how can we do that efficiently? And you can determine, you know, is it a working group? Is it commercial network initiative? Is it signing on to help with something else that's already happening within the project? It's just giving more awareness to all of the different layers that are happening within Rust.
Well, I personally could see some friction there because let's say I was part of a working group. Let's take the embedded working group, and then there's an initiative on the other side. I would be worried that it would kind of affect my agenda or the agenda that the working group created for themselves. Is that a valid concern, or is it in reality two different things?
I think it ends up being two different things in a lot of cases. You know, the working groups, especially the embedded one, they have their own governance, much like the project. They maintain a lot of crates. Ultimately, they own those crates and they decide what goes into them. Where the Foundation's commercial network comes in is it can be sort of an entryway for companies that maybe aren't already aware of the embedded working group to become aware of their work and contribute to that or support them or just, you know, participate in a venue that's more familiar to sort of how they expect to interact with other companies and organizations, like in a commercial network, where the embedded working group is less commercial and corporate in that way. And so hopefully this is kind of like I said before, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's a way of getting everyone in the same room so that everyone can benefit from it. And everyone's still governed by the same people it always was governed by. But now there's hopefully more people in the room and hopefully people with some cash that can help contribute as well.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't even have to be a conflict to begin with, because I might be interested purely in the technical part and I could inform usage of that technology in production at some point. But also the reverse is true, where maybe I'm only interested in the commercial part, as in like guarantees or liability or things like breaking changes. And then I might come in through an initiative on commercial networks. So maybe this is kind of at the end how it will settle down, or yeah. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict.
And I think again, the value of having the commercial network in the project Zulip will hopefully show the collaborative nature of what we hope to get to, right? So you can see, as David's been saying, what commercial interests are like regarding a certain aspect of something, say an embedded. And the embedded working group can just kind of be like, okay, but now the commercial network has an avenue where they can sort of bring up what they're doing, ask somebody from that working group to say, hey, can you help steer us in the right direction? Like what are we doing that's wrong? It's again the making the awareness there of the things that are happening within the project and letting the commercial interests know what's happening. I think what we realize is that there's a lot of silos that happen, right? And the nature of open source is to like open the doors on everything. We should all collaborate together. But when you're hyper focused on one thing, you can lose that. So having everything in the project Zulip, having it be public, having you be able to access that kind of stuff, I think is just one more way of collaborating in the open space and in open source, which, is what Rust is all about.
That is very true. Specifically asking about the Rust and C++ interop initiative, what's the payoff for teams working at the C++ boundary? What's the story there right now? Where are we at?
One of the things that the great technical team at the Foundation are working on with regards to interop is there's some experimental support for function overloading, so that you'll be able to express in your interop boundary, you'll be able to kind of declare overloaded C and C++ functions and call those, and that will it's something you have to kind of fix on the language side of the fence, and enables a whole new sort of bunch of APIs you could never have called before. Now you can, and so things like that are coming out of it. If there's a very concrete language feature we hope to eventually ship on stable that is coming out of this work.
Is that a change that requires a new edition, or could you ship that as part of a normal update?
I'm not as involved in the engineering or the RFC for it to know the specific of whether it requires an edition, but I'm sure the people that are reviewing it and stuff are very much top of the question.
And I think one of the things that's really cool is that this has become also a project goal, and you can follow along and you can see the updates that TOR makes monthly on what's happening in the initiative. So I would say if you're interested in what's going on in that space, to again get in the Zulip and start clicking around and see what's happening, so that if you wanted to contribute, you could do that as well.
Let's briefly talk about maintainer funding. How does that work in practice, and which parts of the project have benefited so far?
So maintainer funding is, there is never enough money to fund as many maintainers as we want to. But, we got to start somewhere. So when we kind of started spinning up the foundation, 5 years ago now, we had a look, the board at the time kind of had a look at, right, okay, where are the most critical places that we need to provide, a reliable service. So kind of infrastructure, I think, is kind of the obvious big thing that, we exist to make sure that the language can be used. Without infrastructure, there's no Rust for anyone. So one of our very first hires was an infrastructure engineer to make sure that there, someone was actually being paid to be responsible for all of this, and it wasn't just burden on volunteer maintainers. So that's where we started. Similarly, crates.io is just, crates.io is Rust. So that was again an area where we thought, right, we really need to fund a full-time maintainer for this and make sure that, there's always someone that is paid to do this, that is responsible. And we're not putting unreasonable expectations on unpaid volunteers. So we have a full-time crates.io maintainer as well. And there, security is something that isn't terribly exciting for a lot of people. I know an awful lot of people are quite bored by thinking about security, but it's so important. It's getting even more important. And luckily, people in the US government of the time and in a lot of the big tech organizations also thought it was very important. So these people put together a fund called Alpha Omega that actually enabled us. They gave us some money to enable us to hire a security engineer to take care of security maintenance as well. So we've been really lucky that we've been able to afford to actually have some salaried maintainers on staff. I would love to have a lot more, but we have to kind of live within our budget. In addition to those full-time salaried staff, though, we do try whatever possible to talk with our members, to talk with companies interested in Rust, and encourage them to invest in the foundation so that we can, at the very least, contract maintainers or provide some other kind of form of grants or assistance. Because we totally understand that, you mentioned burnout earlier. We totally understand that people do end up burning out, especially because, they're doing a lot of hours to get paid. We currently have the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund. So that is something that we invite companies to donate to. And that's something that we work incredibly closely with the project to allocate any funding that goes in there. But otherwise, we also have kind of an ecosystem fund, which enables companies to direct funds towards things that are of specific interest to them. So, if a company comes up to us and says, actually, I want to give you some money, but I really want it to be targeted towards work on, I don't know, async or embedded or whatever. And we can use those kind of contracts to pay maintainers in those areas if they want to be paid. So there's quite a lot of different layers of maintainer funding here. We are, we try very, very hard to raise funds to pay maintainers, but we understand we understand that not every maintainer actually wants to be employed. Like, we have to remember that as well. This is an open source project. We can't just assume that everyone wants to be a full-time maintainer. Some people just want to turn up and do the thing that they're really interested in and not be expected to be responsible for this thing forever. So yeah, there's various things. I mean, Laurie, is there anything else you kind of want to talk about on that?
So yeah, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is that when we started the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund, I think we really got the project to start thinking about what they're worth and what, can we really come together and figure out, like, how can we best support you? And what do you want to do? So there's these project goals that were started, I think, a year or so ago. And the evolution has been really interesting. So project goals are sort of what maintainers want to work on. Whereas what Beck said is sometimes companies come to us and say what work they would like to get done. So it's the reverse, where project people are saying, I would really like to do this. And now what we're doing is we're assigning dollar values to what they would like to do. So we're trying to actively help them get funded for things that they would like to do. Part of this with the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund is I'm on the funding team, and there's 4 of us. And we created this application, and at the all hands, we asked everyone there to submit an application to let us know, like, what kind of funding they needed. What do they want to work on? How can we better serve you? Like, do you want to be full-time? Do you want to be part-time? Is there only like a project goal you would like to work on that you think is going to take 6 months, but you can't even touch it because you need the funding to be able to put other things aside? So from that standpoint, now you have the project telling you what they want to get done. And when we think about the Rust Commercial Network, one of the arms of what we want to do is, again, funding maintainers. So we have now a funding directory where you can look and see kind of what project goals are out there, what might help you long term. Do they need financial support? Do they also need developer support? Part of a project goal is you have to have sort of a team in place. You need a champion within the project. You need reviewer capacity. You need all of that. And people sign on to do that when they sign on to be a part of a project goal. So to me, I think this is an awesome thing that the project is doing, because they're saying, this is what we want to do. This is what we'd like to get funded to do. Can you meet us where we're at? And like, think of all the things that you might get unblocked by like letting us focus our attention on certain things and making sure that we're getting compensated to do those certain things we'd like to do. So I encourage anyone to check that out, the project goals page.
Yeah, I think Laurie covered a lot of that there. One of the things we're learning as a project, thanks to the Foundation's help, is that it's not enough for us to say, hey, we're open source maintainers, we build this great thing called Rust, come give us money. We need to put the structures in place within the project, within the way we work, to advertise, hey, here's where your dollars can go and where they would make a difference. And put this, with those structures, then we can attract more funding and support more maintainers. It's not going to come just fast, and we need to do some work to make it easy for that to happen.
Why does Rust specifically deserve investment, like from companies, from governments, from the community, compared to other languages and ecosystems competing for the same attention?
So I'm not going to say that we are unique in that we think that we should be funded. I think that in the value of open source, we really need to shift the mindset that it's not free as in beer, it's freedom of choice. And if you choose to build using Rust, you should also choose to support those that are creating the infrastructure that you're using to build your products. And again, I think the project goals, having a maintainers fund is a way that we are setting ourselves apart and saying, this is what we would like to do. And I'm using we as a project that we would like to do. You know, it would be great if you could meet us not just halfway, but you could support us so that look at what we could unlock for you. And the cool thing too is that not all project goals are, you know, I want to get this done in 6 months. It's experimentation. And you need to support innovation and experimentation within open source because how else are you going to unlock all of these other opportunities and potential? So, like, yes, there's maintenance, but there's also like, I want to try this new thing. Can you support me in trying this new thing? It might fail, but that's okay because, again, that's the value of open source is that getting behind people that are willing to take chances. And you never know. I think also in open source, sometimes winning can kind of feel like failing. Say you have a crate that's been super successful, lots of adoption, and now you're getting pull requests that you can't handle because it's just you. Can you support that crate maintainer to either hire on additional help? Can you be their development help? So I'm not saying Rust is unique in its problems and its challenges in terms of funding, but I am saying as it is growing, as a language is growing in adoption, you know, we need to grow in our support, and financial support is one really big way of doing that.
Yeah. I think it's also the companies that are using Rust in production. That's not like a one-time. If you're using Rust now, that's it. You're depending on Rust, and Rust is a living thing that has bugs and that has security things we need to fix, and that long tail of maintenance that is part of now the project or the your product you've built on this foundation. You need to make sure that foundation's solid, and supporting the maintainers is how you do that. You can't just adopt Rust and say, well, that's it, it's perfect now forever, because there are going to be things that need fixed, and the people that are fixing those, they need supported.
And when we talk about, again, the Rust Foundation Maintainer Fund, it's this idea of they're calling it maintainer in residence. And so that is someone that is in the project that is maintaining something that we hope to be able to fund for 1 to 2 years. And then we see the next cycle, as what Beck said, is like taking that maintainer in residence, realizing their good work and that this is a core part of the project, and then bringing them in as a new employee of the foundation. So that maintainer in residence position can go to someone else. So in supporting the Foundation Maintainers Fund, you're really supporting the strength of Rust, because the more we can support that, the more employees we can bring in, the more opportunity to give more funding to new people.
I hope many organizations hear this, because at least historically there has been issues with adequately funding open source projects. Companies depend on, but it's almost seen as if it's a commons, a thing that is just there for everyone and free to be used in whatever capacity you like, which is not true, of course.
Yeah, I think a lot of people across open source are trying very hard to change that narrative now. I feel like I have these conversations with a lot of other foundations as well, and especially things like the package repository, crates.io for us. These things take a huge amount of money to run. Again, as Laurie said earlier, open source is not free as in beer, it's free as in puppy, right? It's something that, yes, okay, it's free, but you actually have to take care of it. It's a responsibility as well as a privilege. So I think, we're having these conversations, and we are very much trying to shift that narrative to companies should not see this as a charitable thing. We want to move away as much as possible from, oh, I'm going to give you guys a donation because it gives me the warm and fuzzies. We're trying to kind of demonstrate to businesses that this is the part of the cost of doing business, supporting the foundation, supporting maintainers. That should be a line item in your company's budget. That should be a standing thing that you pay for every year, just like you pay for utilities, just like you pay for your lawyer. If you need this, if you need Rust to work so that you can sell your products, then there should be a cost to your business of supporting that, because otherwise, all it takes is, a poor economy for a year or two, or businesses going bust, or, an economic bubble bursting or whatever. If all of the companies at the same time decide, oh, actually, I can't really afford to donate money to open source this year, it makes the infrastructure very, very unstable. It means that, we can't pay people to do things. And ultimately, it means that businesses will not be able to rely on these kinds of things. So, we're definitely trying to kind of drive a narrative that this should not be seen as a charitable, philanthropic thing, giving money to the foundation. It should be seen as you being a responsible business and making sure that you are actually supporting the thing that you are relying on.
And a big part of it is putting a price tag on it, just to say that's the number that we're dealing with, making it tangible, because that's also historically been missing for many such projects that have to organize themselves and so on. How expensive is it to run Rust?
It's very expensive. We are very lucky because we get a lot of things donated in kind, so we do not have to pay for absolutely everything. And if we did, I think we'd probably already have buckled, to be honest, because, the numbers are eye-watering and the usage trends are going up. So it would be in the millions and millions of dollars a year in cash terms if we had to actually pay market price for absolutely everything. As I say, we're very lucky that an awful lot of things we get given in kind by very generous businesses that understand that they rely on this. But it's mind-boggling, I think, the numbers that we're talking about.
Like, all of the work you do is amazing because I think it drives Rust adoption, which means more people come into the language, into the community. But of course, if Rust gets adopted by organizations, they are looking for training. What's the history there? What's the story around training programs regarding the Rust Foundation?
So there's always been this kind of accusation, I think, that Rust is really difficult to learn. People made a lot of the kind of steep learning curve. And I think it probably put some people off. We don't want to put people off. And we talked a lot to our members. It's like, well, this is a learning problem. This is not oh, this language is just impossible. It's like, how do we make sure it's friendlier? How do we make sure it's easier for people to learn? And what can we as a foundation do to help with that? So, we looked, okay, do we develop our own course? Do we do something else? Do we work with other providers? And, over the years, a lot of courses actually did come out that are absolutely fantastic. So I think, if you were not a particularly experienced engineer, a lot of people would struggle to have just picked up the Rust book and gone from there. But an awful lot of great courses have been open sourced as well. Google did a Rust course, which is fantastic, on which they've open sourced. There's many, many courses out there now. So while we were having these conversations, it kind of became obvious that it's not necessarily the courses themselves that we needed to kind of contribute to that universe. Actually, we were moving into a space where, okay, which course should I take? Which providers should I hire? When we're talking about adoption, as you said, the question businesses are asking is, okay, who do I get to train my staff in this? And I think that was where, sort of talking to our members, it became clear that that kind of accreditation of actual existing trainers was where there was a kind of gap, and where we could hopefully be of some assistance to people out there. Because, having a stamp of approval from the Rust Foundation that you are a trusted trainer, you know what you're talking about, we've reviewed your materials, we know that you were able to communicate these ideas coherently and enable people to become productive pretty quickly. So yeah, that seemed to be the best thing for the trainers out there, many of whom, they're our members, but also us as a foundation actually being useful. I don't think it would have been particularly useful for us to just create yet another course, but creating the ability for excellent trainers to be immediately recognizable as trusted experts. I think that adds value. That's us adding value to them, and hopefully making sure that lots more people can enjoy Rust.
Can people already apply to become trusted trainers already?
Yes, the program is now open. It launched last week. We have, I think, 3 or 4 founding training programs on there. But yeah, we are open to applications, and all the information can be found on our website.
Do we even need trainers now that we have AI?
I think anyone who is a trainer would say absolutely. I don't think we're in a position yet where good quality training can just be wholesale replaced with AI. As great a tool as AI is for many things, and as much as it is improving every day, I think, everyone has a different learning style and preference. And for a lot of people, that is having a sympathetic human being explaining things to them. So I don't think we're there yet.
And what's the Foundation's view on AI-generated Rust code?
I don't think it's for us to necessarily have a view. We're here to make sure that Rust is useful, productive, relevant, fun for people to use. And it's up to, I think, individuals and companies to figure out how they want to do that. What I will say is that, we want to make sure that as stewards of the language, it's our job to make sure that Rust has a bright future and that people still want to use it in 10, 20 years' time. So I do think there's some responsibility for us to make sure that if people want to use it with AI, then we have to make sure that we can support that. But I also don't think that we're in a position to mandate anything. We just want to make sure it's as useful and as available as people need it to be.
Traditionally, the final question is, what's your message to the Rust community?
Well, I love that there's 3 of us, so we can each kind of give a little extra message from one. We now have 3. And for me, it would be to really check out the Rust commercial network. This is an opportunity to have a different entry point into Rust with others that are adopting Rust, and for you to find a way to make it easier for you, for your company, for you to share what you're working on with other organizations, and to find some common ground, which, is the spirit of open source.
Yeah, and for my part, I'd say, think about supporting open source projects that you depend on, whether that's Rust or other languages or other projects. There are lots of really passionate open source maintainers out there who could do with some support.
For me, I just want to encourage everyone out there to get in touch with us and tell us how we can help you. The reason for the Rust Foundation to exist is to steward the language and support the people that love it. We want your input. So yeah, tell us how we can help.
And that's everything I have to say. Beck, Laurie, David, thanks so much for taking time. That was amazing. And thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Rust in Production is a podcast by Corrode. It is hosted by me, Matthias Endler, and produced by Simon Brüggen. For show notes, transcripts, and to learn more about how we can help your company make the most of Rust, visit corrode.dev. Thanks for listening to Rust in Production.